Hi, welcome back to day two. Sorry, we had a big feedback there. Not sure why that unmuted. Lesson learned, that's how the system works. It unmutes everything when we start. So, welcome to day two of IDTX 2024. I don't want to waste too much time. Just want to thank you all for being here. For those of you here yesterday, welcome back. For those who are joining us for the first time, welcome to the event. Just a massive thank you to everyone who got so involved in the chat yesterday, both on here, on the platform, in the WhatsApp group. And a reminder that the WhatsApp group does disappear at the end of the week. So please don't be afraid to use it. And in this image that you might have this annoying WhatsApp group pinging you forevermore. Come Sunday evening, it's gone forever. So don't worry. I'm going to hurry up and get out of the way, though, because our first session is with Susi Miller, a returning IDTX speaker, I'm very pleased to say, who's going to be talking to us a little bit about accessibility. So, Susi, the stage is yours, and off you go.
Thank you very much. So I just wanted to start by really welcoming everyone to this presentation. And the title of it, I'm not sure if you can see it very clearly, but it's How Quiet Accessibilising is Disrupting a Diversish Industry. So as ever, I just wanted to start by thanking Tom really for inviting me today, and for all of you for giving up your really valuable time to find out more about making learning content accessible and inclusive. Whether you're here live or whether you've very impressively managed to carve out some time to watch the recording. So that's something that I find incredibly difficult, despite my best intentions. So if you have done that, welcome, and thank you so much, as I say, for making time to do that. So what I'll do with my presentation, just start with an agenda to give you an idea of what I'm going to cover. So I'm going to start with a few introductions, a bit of an exploration about what we mean about some of the key terms that I'll be talking about. So looking at accessibility, disability, and also what we mean by this word diversish. And then we'll kind of explore a bit what this term accessibilising actually means. So then I'll focus on some practical tips, and I think that's obviously a vital component of any session about accessibility. I think otherwise it really can sometimes get bogged down and feel, kind of goes into the abstract and the technical side of things. So really important to always have some practical tips. Obviously it fits in perfectly with the theme of this conference. So I'm sharing lots of practical things that we can do. Now, some of them I'm sure some of you will already be doing. If they're new to you, then they're kind of some of the key things that I find are sort of really kind of helpful when I'm sort of thinking about accessibilising. So doing this kind of making things accessible and inclusive. And as I say, I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go along. So what I'll do to finish is just have some key takeaways, question and answer if we have time. Also, I've spoke to Tom earlier, and we will stop a couple of times in the session. So if there are any questions that come into chat, Tom's in control of that. He's also in control of posting the links that I've sent him. So all of the links of all the kind of resources, the videos, etc., that are in this session, you'll be able to find in the links that Tom posts for you. So moving on swiftly to introductions and definitions. So I will start with just a quick overview of myself. So I'm Susi Miller. I've been involved in L&D for over 30 years. I started as an English teacher, and then I became an IT systems trainer. And then I really focused on designing and developing digital learning content. So I've worked across all sectors, really, public, private, and third sectors, and also in higher education. And for the best part of about 8 to 9 years now, I've really been focused on digital and learning accessibility. So how to train it, how to make it come alive, how to change behaviour, and how to make it stick. So that interest led me to start my own company, and that's called Ella Hub. I started that about 5 years ago. And for the first few years, I focused really on writing my book, which is called Designing Accessible Learning Content. That then led to a focus on training, consultancy, and increasingly more and more auditing, with probably over about 60 organisations across all 3 sectors. And that was really an incredible opportunity to find out more about the challenges and the opportunities of making learning content accessible in organisations. And I found that really invaluable when I was trying to write my, kind of turn my book into an online training course. and that's called the Designing Accessible Learning Content program. So some of the slides that I'll be using in the session today come from that program. So that, as I say, was kind of the next step on from writing the book, was to put it into practice and turn it into something that was proving that accessibility could actually work when you were creating learning content. So that's me. So we'll move on now to some of the important definitions that we need to be aware of in this session. So always, I think it's always really valuable just to start with a look at accessibility. So I find it really valuable, I think, just to focus back on this definition of about accessibility, because I think there is still a lot of kind of people aren't really sometimes sure what you mean when you're talking about accessibility. So for some people, it does mean things like easily obtained or used, and it can mean things like easily understood as well. So to clarify what we mean by accessibility in this session, I always come back to a definition from the World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C. And what they say is that accessibility means that people with disabilities can equally perceive, understand, navigate, and interact with content. And it also means that they can contribute equally without barriers. So the reason I always come back to this definition is just to highlight that accessibility, in the sense that we're talking about in this session, at its heart is about making sure that people with disabilities and access needs have equal access to our learning content, and also that they can contribute equally without barriers. I'm going to come back to this word barriers in the next definition that we look at. So let's move on now to clarify what we mean when we say disability or people with disabilities. So again, I think it's worth being aware, coming back really to this idea of barriers. So I think a lot of the legal definitions of disability traditionally are based around the medical model, and that's focused around the idea that disability is caused by impairments that need to be treated, managed, or cured. The definition that I'm about to give you is based on the social model of disability, and it comes from the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And what it says is that persons with disabilities include those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments, which, here's the important bit, in interaction with various barriers, may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. So coming back to this focus on barriers again, I think it's really important, a really important theme when we consider accessibility. And that's because if disability is partly caused by barriers, then every single one of us has the ability to find out about those barriers and to enable equal access for all of our digital learners by removing them. And that is a key concept when we start exploring this idea of quiet accessibilising in more detail. So we're going to do that later in the session, but for now, what we'll do is focus on this term diversish, which you may have heard before. So the term was first coined by the Valuable 500, and if you haven't heard of them, I really recommend looking them up. They're a global business partnership of 500 companies working together to end disability exclusion, and they were founded by Caroline Casey in 2019. And I think this idea of diversish is best explained by a fantastic video that they put together to illustrate some common types of diversish opinions and attitudes. So this video had such an impact on me when I saw it that I just wanted to share it with you. So I'm going to play it in a moment. I'm going to, in a kind of L&D fashion, I'm going to start before I play it by asking a task. So what I'd like you to do when you watch it is I want you to see if you can kind of identify any similar opinions and attitudes maybe in the people that you might have come across in your organization or maybe in our L&D industry. So I'm going to play the video for you in a second. It does have sound, so you may have to adjust your sound levels. It also, I'm going to have playing it in YouTube, so it does have captions. I might have to activate those. So play it for you now, and hopefully, Tom, if there's any issues with the sound, you can let me know.
Congratulations on making the top 100 diversish companies for 2019.
Thank you.
So this year you've announced that diversity is at the heart of your brand agenda. How does that address disability?
That's a terrific question. And the thing is, I think this is all about inclusivity. Yeah. So this year, for instance, Chris, we sponsored a float at the Gay Parade. So we're completely supportive currently of all the LGBT, the QI. There's more letters, I know, and I always forget them.
It does change all the time.
We believe in marketing to everyone. We don't want to single out disabled people for special treatment because that's, they're too valuable.
So you don't market to anyone specifically?
We do. We do to everyone who fits in with the core brand message, which is as much about inclusion as it is about embracing the future of.
La diversité est essentielle dans notre groupe. Nous avons fait réaliser une fresque magnifique sur le mur de la cantine qui célèbre, et je pense que ça va vous plaire, l'émancipation des Noirs.
I just wondered, what with your reputation as being a company with diversity very much a part of your brand ethos, whether you've ever considered a range of clothing for disabled people?
We're a high fashion brand for those with high disposable incomes. So disability isn't really an obvious choice for us. I mean, we love disabled people, so we're really active in helping and supporting other companies within this sector to solve that problem. Thanks for asking.
And what about disability in the workplace? Do you have any disabled employees?
Oh, yes. In fact, just stop the cameras for a second.
Would you say that the makeup of your company workforce is reflective of the percentage of people with disabilities of working age in this country?
Disability is something we feel is very important in this business going forward. I think 2019 is going to be an exciting year to be disabled.
Yeah. So this is Bill. He's paraplegic, isn't that right, Sharon? And you're on our diversity page on our website, aren't you, Bill?
Yes, I'm the only one currently.
Tremendous addition to the team.
Yeah, disability is something that we are committed to investing in very soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
When?
Le tout est de trouver le moment le plus opportun. 2019 est déjà consacré à célébrer la femme, l'avenir est féminin et tout ça.
Because 2019 is earmarked for BAME, BAME. It's an important cause and it means a lot to me personally.
2020?
Ice caps.
2021?
Mindfulness. Because...
Do you have a year in mind for people with disabilities?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, just watch this space. That's what I can say. So...
Yeah.
Okay, hope you agree with me. That's a very thought-provoking and impactful video about being diversish. So one of the things I asked you to do was if you recognise any opinions or anyone in that video. Now I know that for me, there's one in particular who frequently kind of visits my worst nightmares. I've met them many times at L&D exhibitions and conferences, but I'll leave you to guess which one that one might be. So let's just move on now to clarify what diversish actually means. So according to the Valuable 500, diversish refers to organisations, and I've also added industries in here as well. So I'll just go on to the definition. It's organisations or industries that overlook, ignore or postpone anything to do with disability. So I think, you might not necessarily agree with me when I say that the L&D industry is diversish, but I think to kind of give you some examples of some of the things that I've experienced, I think at the L&D industry, I can see some good examples of that. So I think one of the things is the amount of learning content that is actually accessible to best practice, and in many cases to legal standards. It's still incredibly low. So there aren't really any statistics. That's something that I'm often asked about, but there aren't, that I'm aware of, any statistics that kind of prove this. But for me, kind of a good estimate, that percentage, that 4% that was referred to in the diversish video, for me is quite a good, if not a generous estimate of actually how much learning content is accessible that we're creating in our industry. So other things that I've noticed is that disability and accessibility are kind of routinely ignored still from the agenda of a lot of conferences and exhibitions. There's a lot of organizations or teams that specialize in DEI training, and they seem to be still developing or selling courses that might not necessarily be accessible. Company representatives that I've spoken to a lot very often think accessibility is just about people who have vision access needs and use screen readers. I've got things like L&D awards making really no mention of accessibility in the criteria that you need to enter them, and also things like predictions. Every year the predictions for what's going to be important in L&D are kind of always lacking accessibility. So those are kind of the industry ones. I think from some personal experiences that I've had, sticking just a few key ones. I don't want to turn this into a rant, but I think things like being told that I can only include images of people with certain acceptable types of disabilities in my presentations and publicity material is one that really sticks with me. Being told by an authoring tool provider that it wasn't a focus for their authoring tool, that accessibility wasn't a focus for their actual authoring tool, not necessarily the output, because being a learning practitioner wasn't an option for anyone with a disability. And also a lot of people being on board with accessibility before they realise that actually it does involve committing to both investing both in time and in money. And then quite often the ghosting kind of starts when that penny drops, that actually there is some commitment involved in making learning content accessible. So let's take the opportunity now to get some audience participation. I want to find out if any of you have experienced diversish opinions and attitudes in your work environments. And to do that, we're going to focus on one particular scenario that involves interacting with your L&D manager. Some of you might recognize this as the formidable storyline Gianna that you can see on the screen there, particular favorites. So the scenario asks you to imagine how your manager would react if you tell them that accessibility should be a top priority in your team and that you think all your organization's learning content should be accessible and inclusive as the default. So my own experience of this scenario created this reaction, which I'll show you. She's got one of her other poses, and this textbook diversish postponing tactic. So I was basically told, well, I'm really impressed with your commitment to D&I, but we can't even consider making our learning content accessible until we find out how many people this impacts. So let's put it on hold and ask HR for a report. So that was my particular experience. So what I was going to do now then was just ask Tom if he could kind of take over the chat. So if anyone's been in that similar experience, it would be great to know any of the kind of reactions that you had, or if you can imagine yourself being in that experience and what type of reaction you might get either from your manager or maybe also, you know, if you were mentioning that to your colleagues. So any kind of diversish type of opinions that you might have experienced or imagine that you could experience would be brilliant. If you wouldn't mind just giving us a couple of examples in the chat. And I know we quite often have to wait, Tom, don't we, until the chat catches up.
Sorry,
I can't hear you yet.
Double muting. There we go. So I see we've got about 6-second delay, so in fact the chat will catch up pretty quickly now.
Okay.
But I got a very similar response to yourself, except without the let's get a report from HR. Instead, it was just ask around. As if I was going to walk around with a sandwich board, kind of saying, you know, do you need help? Talk to me, because that's going to work. You know. Oh, here we go. We've got some responses coming in. Olga, I know It's important, but we've got a lot of firefighting to do at the moment, and that's more urgent.
Yes, very common. Thank you, Olga.
Anyone else has had the experience? Please do drop it in the chat.
Or just imagine.
Oh, here we go. I've encouraged managers being open to accessibility in principle, but not wanting to read through the literature, research, or WCAG guidelines. It's too complicated. Thankfully, not where you work now. Well, that's good to know, at least.
Brilliant. Anyone else? That's fine. Otherwise, we can move on.
I've got some other general comments about these experiences are genuinely enraging.
Yes, I completely agree. Good. Okay, perfect. let's move on then. Okay, so I don't know if you have to mute yourself again, Tom. So I think the next thing really to explore in the session is, if that is the case, is that if you have had some experience of this, then what are we going to do about it, really? So I think this is where quiet accessibilising comes in, and what we're going to explore now really is just what that term actually means and where did it come from. So to explore this, I think it's worth starting with ditching what I call my kind of shiny, happy LinkedIn history that you can see on the screen here, and really switching instead to the reality of my work history and some of the key moments that led to the emergence really of this thinking about quiet accessibilising. So in my experience, things that have happened to me, I was working with a blind student when I was working abroad and teaching, and being told that sourcing Braille books for her wasn't even a possibility, wasn't something that we could consider doing. I've worked in the private sector, and I've been told that accessibility isn't a priority because there wasn't enough investment for it. I was working in the public sector, and I was told by external consultants that accessibility didn't matter because we were never going to get sued. And I've also worked in higher education and being told that we didn't need to make our learning content accessible because actually the institution I was working for were employing lawyers that were trying to prove that we didn't need to fall under the regulations that had just come in, rather than actually investing in making learning content accessible. So that leads to kind of, well, what did I do about it? So for me, I actually started my own company. That's what the kind of the impetus that really made me start my own company. And then I realized I had a dyslexia assessment, and I realized that about like 25% of entrepreneurs in the UK, I actually did have an access need or a disability. In my case, it was dyslexia. So I then decided to write a book to show people how to make learning content accessible if they needed to or wanted to do this on their own. And then I turned that book into an online self-access course. And that was really to show people how to practically apply accessibility, but also to prove that making learning content accessible actually did enhance rather than undermine the learning experience. That kind of myth that we still have in our industry a lot, that actually accessibility can undermine the learning experience. So, and the reason that I did that, because I was passionate enough about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility to do something about it. In effect, I was doing something about it when organizations and other people I was working with said that I couldn't. So after a while, I started becoming aware that more and more people that I was talking to at grassroots level were actually doing the same thing. And that's when I thought, okay, I need a better term than being told you can't do anything to make your learning content accessible and doing it anyway, to describe what we were actually doing. And luckily at the time, a lot of people were talking about quiet quitting. And so I thought, okay, that's an interesting term. But unlike quiet quitting, which describes a form of disengagement where employees lose their passion for fighting for goals and their enthusiasm for their work, and they only do the bare minimum, quiet accessibilising is the exact opposite. So here's my definition. So quiet accessibilising is harnessing the positivity and the purpose that you get from doing the right thing or making a difference, and taking action yourself to make learning content as accessible and inclusive as possible, even if others don't agree with you. So it gives you a sense of purpose and positivity, I find, and genuinely, passionately believe in, because you have the power to live up to your beliefs and your principles, even if people around you disagree. And as I'm sure many of you might have experienced, that may be at management level, as in the diversish video examples and in our scenario example, but it's also very possible that it can come from your colleagues, as these examples from the DALC program, they're just some examples of some of the things that we've experienced. So for me, the great thing about quiet accessibilising is the impact that you're having on people, because we have just our final person here. Despite our final colleagues' belief that there are no people with disabilities or access needs in our workforces, according to the research, this is really, really valuable research done actually in May last year by the Boston Consulting Group, they found that 25% of people surveyed considered themselves to have a disability or a health condition activity. And that survey covered nearly 28,000 employees in 16 countries. So I always think it's worth remembering that quiet accessibilising really does have the power to improve the learning experience and the ability to see and the ability to succeed of up to 25% of our audience. So another great thing about quiet accessibilising is that it has the power to quietly but powerfully challenge and disrupt diversism. So whether that's with your colleagues, your leadership, or with your industry. So what I'm going to do now is just focus on some things that everyone can do to improve the accessibility and inclusivity of their learning content. So that can be noisily with the support of your organisation and colleagues. If you're lucky, that's absolutely brilliant. But otherwise, just doing it on your own, just doing it quietly is absolutely fine. So this is when we're going to move on to getting practical. And I think, Tom, probably because of the lapse in the chat, maybe we'll just wait until the end before we have any question and answers rather than stopping and changing the audio again. Okay, so we'll start off when we're looking at getting practical with our practical tips on accessibility. So these actions around improving the accessibility of learning content, slightly different in accessibility, inclusivity, and I'll talk about the second one in a moment. But from an accessibility point of view, for us at Ella Hub, that really means finding out, as Emily was talking about, the web content accessibility guidelines and implementing them whenever you can. So I'm going to start with some key actions and some useful resources. And again, those resources are all linked in the links that Tom's posted, that I found really, really useful when I started making my learning content accessible. So we'll start with a standard which includes people with a whole range of different vision access needs. So that includes people with low vision, people who are colorblind, older people whose color sensitivity is often impacted, etc. A whole range of people. And I'm sure this one probably is really familiar to very many of you, especially those of you that are already interested in accessibility. But I still think it's really worth being aware of, because it's one of the most common standard failures that we still see when we are doing audits for Ella Hub. And I also just wanted to mention a key takeaway really from a talk yesterday from Christina Rogers. So she was talking about neurodiversity, and she said a really interesting thing, and that was that colour can have a really profound impact on neurodivergent people. In her case, she was talking about ADHD, but she described the fact that certain colours and combinations of colours can actually hurt people. You know, they can actually have a physical, really, really strong physical reaction. So I think while we can't know exactly how all of our learners will experience colour, one thing that we can do is to at least use good colour contrast. So that's what we're going to have a look at now, and a really common tool that can help you to do that. So a key things is the text and background contrast. And on the example here, we've got some examples of a slide which has various text against the background, and one of them has a light green background and white text. So when we are making, when we're looking at color contrast, we need to make sure that we're meeting this ratio of 4.5 to 1. Again, I'm sure many of you are aware of this. So the best way to do that, there's lots and lots of different color contrast ratio checkers that you can use. The one that I'm showing on the screen here is the WebAIM one, and this is one which I kind of recommend when people are starting with color contrast, just because it's a website. You don't need to download anything. You'll notice on the slide as well that I have a screenshot. I'm going to show you a video in a moment of that in action, but I just wanted to point out on the screenshot that actually I've noticed in the last couple of days that I don't know when they did this, but WebAIM have actually updated the interface. So actually it is a little bit more user friendly to find the color picker in the contrast checker now, and also they talk about luminance rather than I think lightness sliders, which is probably a more accurate technical term. So it's an improvement, but I just wanted to let you know that you're looking at kind of the older version of the interface when we're looking at the videos. So really just a quick demonstration, if you've not done this before, of how you can easily use a color contrast checker. If you've got the values, like we said before, you can just put them into the fields. If you haven't, just using that little color picker, I'll just play this for you. You can see how easy it is just to check that your colors are matching. So what we're going to do is just check that green against the white and see whether that matches. Sorry, see whether that passes, and you can see that actually down here in your results that actually it doesn't pass. So one thing that you can do if your colors aren't passing is to use those lightness sliders. So I think this is the second one. And you can just see how easy it is there to kind of move your colors. You can move either of the color and lighten them, or change the luminance of them, we should say now, and see how easy it is just to get that to pass. So that's brilliant. Lots of people are aware of that. I think the thing that I found, again, this is kind of working with organizations, is the difficulty that a lot of people have is that sometimes the brand colors that they're working with, they're often presented kind of as in sort of, this is a single set of colors that you can use. And the issue is with that people aren't quite so aware that when you're talking about color contrast ratios, you're talking about the color contrast between two colors. So what you really need is this beautiful example here from a colleague that I used to work with, is showing the colors in combination with each other and telling you which two combinations, which colors work together. So if your organization has done that, that's brilliant. If they don't, they haven't, then again, this comes come to something that you can kind of do proactively. There is actually a color contrast checker which really focuses on these brand colors. Again, the link is in what Tom has given you. So that's the really key tool I found in making sure that if you're using brand colors within an organization and maybe they haven't emphasized or they haven't focused on accessibility, that's something that you can do yourself. It can save you a lot of time. Another thing that comes up quite a lot on training that we get asked about is people might have clients who are asking them for text to be put on top of an image, and they might want it in a particular way, so maybe with no kind of transparency or something. So again, another really useful color contrast checker that can be helpful in that situation is this Brandwood one. And what it does is you can kind of move your placement of the text around on your on the images behind it, and it will automatically tell you what's passing and failing, rather than in the past I've certainly done color picking where I've kind of tried to work out. So it's a much quicker way of doing that. So again, that's something that can really save you a lot of time when you are trying to kind of look at some of the complexities of making your learning content accessible. Okay, so the next one we're going to move to is descriptive transcript. So for me, a really useful thing to do. So descriptive transcripts are really important for people who have got vision access needs, who won't be able to see the content of a video. So what they are is essentially a script of what's happening, including the dialogue, but also all of the visual details that someone might miss. So if you haven't got an audio description, then the next best thing is to have a descriptive transcript. So the thing about creating a descriptive transcript, as anyone who's ever created one will know, if you haven't kind of started off with accessibility kind of in mind at the beginning of creating your video content, you don't have maybe a script or something to help you, or if you're starting from scratch, one of the things that can be really helpful is as a method that we use at Ella Hub, and that's really to play all of our videos. We just play them through a video conferencing platform, and that has captioning functionality. So what that does is that kind of produces a transcript for us, and that really is the basis for the transcript that we work on. So it probably reduces about, I think, by about half compared to starting from scratch. So once you've done that, once you've added in the descriptive information that, as I say, someone who's got vision access need might not be able to see, then you've kind of got your full descriptive transcript. Then it's really easy to add that to your resources. That can be in an accordion block, it can be in kind of the additional resources that people go to under the video, for example. And it really makes such a difference to learners with visual access needs, but it also is really helpful. Just the fact of having a transcript is also really helpful to people with cognitive access needs. Again, Christina was talking about the different ways that people who are neurodivergent kind of process information, and just giving people the option to have different ways of accessing that can be really valuable. So and it also caters for learner preferences. Some people who just prefer to kind of read content than they do to watch video content. Okay, so my next really top tip for quiet accessibilizing is one that was really transformational for me, and that is to get started and actually take the first steps and download and start testing content using a screen reader. So I really recommend the NVDA screen reader. It's free. They do ask you for a donation, which obviously encourage you to make if you can. It supports their amazingly incredible work that they do. But there's also a user guide available, and there's also lots of other resources if you look online, so kind of cheat sheets, etc., that can be really helpful. So the key thing, I think, when you start listening to content using a screen reader is you might find a screen which looks like this and looks fine for sighted learners, but it could sound like this. And that's what I'm going to do now, is just play you the NVDA screen reader reading out the content of this slide. And again, it has got sound, so again, you might have to adjust your the volume when I play it. Might have to turn it up.
Leading with emotional intelligence. Main landmark background style sheet image 356479078.png. Graphic background transparency rectangle. Rectangle 32. Leadership Skills Series. Leading with Emotional Intelligence. In this course, we'll first unpack what emotional intelligence is. We'll then guide you to boost your emotional intelligence skills by strengthening your personal and social competence. Clock icon. Freeform 1. Freeform 3. Freeform 2. Freeform 6. Freeform 5. Freeform 4. You are advised to set aside 30 minutes to complete this course. Button Start Course. Straight arrow connector 4.
Okay, so anyone who has experience of testing content, you might be aware that that slide is failing on at least 3 WCAG standards. So that's why it's so really, it's so useful and beneficial just to have that experience of what a screen reader actually sounds like. So the next thing I'm going to do is kind of in my top tips. I think one of the scariest things when you get started with using NVDA, which really put me off when I started, and I think also many other people, is working out how to switch it on, and most importantly, working out how to switch it off. It's one of the things that it took me a while to work out, and it was talking to me all the time in the background while I was trying to work out how to switch it off. So I've put together this really quick explanation. It's my first experiment with Camtasia. So I want to thank the lovely Jane Davids. I'm not sure if she's here, but I want to thank Jane Davids anyway for helping me with this little video. So if you take nothing at all away from this talk, the one thing that I would really encourage you to do is to download NVDA and to have a go at switching it on and then switching it off. So I'll just play this video for you now.
In this video, I'm going to show you how to get started with the NVDA screen reader. So I'm going to show you 2 things. First of all, how to start NVDA, how to activate the software, and secondly, how to exit it, and that will actually stop NVDA from reading out the content of the web page. So once you've downloaded NVDA from the website, there are various different ways that you can open the software. So one way is to use your shortcut keys, and if you like using that method to open up your software, the shortcut keys you need to be aware of are Control and then Alt, and then you follow that with N. And the way that I remember that is I tend to think of N for new session, a new NVDA session. The other thing that you can do once it's opened is you can pin it to your taskbar, and that's exactly what I've done. So if you look at the bottom of your screen here, you can see that there's a little NVDA icon. I'm just going to select that or click on that, and that will bring up the little pop-up box to show that NVDA has started. And you'll also hear NVDA talking in the background.
Welcome to NVDA dialog. Welcome to NVDA.
Okay, so I'm going to select OK to stop that from talking and to get rid of that dialog box. And then I'm going to move my cursor up to the top of the page, again just to stop NVDA from talking in the background. So what I'll do now is just use my cursor. I'll just really hover over some of the content of the page, again just to give you a flavour of what NVDA sounds like in the background.
Developing for assistive technology. An important aspect of making sure you consider accessibility up front is knowing how to use your authoring tool to include people who use assistive technology. This is especially important at the start of a project with an important...
Okay, so I'm going to move my cursor back up to the top of the page again to stop it from talking. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move my cursor into the image that you can see on the page, and that will start it reading out the alternative text. Now, when I do that, what I will also do in the background is I will use the shortcut keys to exit the program, and that will stop NVDA from talking completely. You'll basically come out of the program. Now, that is a really, really useful shortcut key to be aware of. Sometimes when you get started with NVDA, it starts talking to you and it can be very overwhelming. So what you need to remember to exit NVDA, again, use your control keys, your shortcut keys on your keyboard, and the shortcut keys that you need to be aware of are the insert key. Now, that is the kind of master NVDA shortcut key. If you haven't changed anything on your settings, it will always be the insert key. You then follow the insert key with the Q. You press the Q key, and that basically, again, another way of remembering that is to think of quit. So that will actually take you completely out of the program and stop NVDA from talking. So that's exactly what I'm going to do now. As I said, I'm going to move my cursor over onto the image, and you can hear it reading out the alternative text. And now I'm going to exit the program. I'm going to hit insert and then Q. Then that little exit dialog box comes up and I click on OK. And I've now completely come out of the program and I've stopped NVDA from reading aloud the content of that page. So in that video, what we covered was how to switch NVDA on and also how to exit the program.
Okay, so hopefully you found that useful. And as I say, if you don't do anything at all else after this session, if you could download the NVDA screen reader and have a go at switching it on and off, that would be absolutely fantastic. We will move on to some other ones now. What we're going to do is move on to our last tip really for accessibility. Because we focused mainly on vision, I just wanted to include another one that, although it improves the learning experience for everyone, it's particularly helpful for people like me who are neurodivergent, and that is using plain language. So for me, using readability checkers has been kind of another transformational thing that I've done really in improving my own learning content. And although these checkers are kind of built into many of the tools that we're using, I have found two websites that are really helpful. Again, you might be aware of these. The first is the Hemingway site, which is useful if you're writing your own content because it gives you recommendations on how you can make your language more straightforward. You can see that one in that screenshot there. And the second one is from WebFX, and it's really useful because it gives a very clear visual score on lots of different readability indices. And I find this one is really hugely helpful if I'm working maybe with subject matter experts, and they kind of give me very complex language that I'm trying to persuade them to simplify. It kind of has more impact if I'm showing them readability checker results rather than just me saying, can you make this more simple? Can you simplify this or make this language plainer? One practical tip from my own work that was really working on the DALC program is a method of how to simplify language if it gets identified as being too complex by a readability checker. Again, that's something that can be really time consuming to do. So partly because I couldn't do a presentation in 2024 and not mention AI, but mainly because I found it hugely helpful. I asked ChatGPT to rewrite my language to different reading levels and kind of and then refine until I kind of come up with a language that is at a suitable level for my audience and that I'm happy with. So something that really has saved me a lot of time using AI. So moving on now to looking at some tips about inclusivity and kind of explaining the difference between the two. So for me, accessibility inclusivity, it is a slightly different thing. My kind of definition of accessibility and inclusivity was sort of influenced by a really interesting video that was made by Celebrating Disability. And what it showed really was that if we just focus on accessibility, then it can be the equivalent of a person in a wheelchair being shown to their table in a restaurant, through the kitchen, past the toilets, while their companions are welcomed through the front door. So, something can be accessible, but just because it's accessible, it doesn't necessarily mean it's inclusive. So that really made me start thinking about what I mean, by inclusivity in learning. And for me, it's inclusive learning is something that makes learners feel welcomed, considered, and valued, and provides a good learner experience for everyone. So it's kind of not necessarily just meeting the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is part of inclusivity, but it's going a little bit further. So it's things kind of maybe different to, maybe above and beyond the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines that create this inclusive environment. So a couple of tips on inclusivity. Starting off with a really important one is using images of people with visible disabilities. So I think that being very mindful of the imagery that you use is really powerful if you have got any control over it, because a great phrase is that representation fuels change. So if you have got any control of the images that you use in your learning content, you can really make a powerful difference by using them. So a brilliant resource, again shared in the links, is the DE&I Imagery Toolkits by City and Getty Images. So there's lots and lots of different resources, websites available, but this is a key one. I think it includes a wide range of different aspects of identity, but one of the things it focuses on is disability. And what we've done in the DALT program is actually kind of look at the checklist that they have come up with. We've kind of expanded on that and kind of made it more suitable for learning content. But it just helps you to ensure that the images that you use of people with visible disabilities aren't reinforcing stereotypes and biases. So it's kind of a really useful starting point to be aware of, is the imagery and toolkit, and then just realizing how much how much you can influence things just by a simple thing of using images that aren't reinforcing stereotypes and biases. Next thing to be aware of is capital letters. Again, not a WCAG standard around this, but it's something that we see a surprising amount in the audits that we do at Ella Hub, and it can affect everybody, but it does affect people particularly with cognitive access needs and particularly dyslexia. So it's when people kind of use capital letters for titles or sometimes in whole sentences. So if we just have an idea, I won't go to ask you this again, I'll just skip this, but it's worth being aware of kind of some of the facts around using these capital letters, that actually it makes it harder to read by about 13 to 18%, and that comes from gov.uk. So if you're aware of these kind of facts, then sometimes it can help you yourself, or if you're working with your colleagues, it's something that might just prompt you to say, well, actually using capital letters isn't necessarily a great experience. So it all comes around how we perceive and how we read. So we tend to read words in by their shape rather than actually kind of letter by letter. So when we change into capital letters, what we're doing is actually changing the shape of words. So that makes it harder to read for everybody. As I say, it has a particular impact on people that are dyslexic. Okay, another one to be aware of, probably these are the last two from an inclusivity point of view, really transformational, is to have the idea of including an accessibility statement and also just maybe a glossary as standard. So that's something that we do now, as standard in all of our learning content, is we always include an accessibility statement which tells learners how accessible it is, if we've had any issues, how we provide alternatives, etc. And also always in an organisation a contact, someone that can get hold of someone and tell them if they are having any accessibility issues that you might have missed. So a really key thing to be considering. And then, as I say, for us as well, we, as standard with all of the learning that we create, is create a module glossary, because we never know which of the what level of language or education our learners will have. We can't be certain, we can have a good idea of it, but it's not always possible. So that's something which, can make it just more inclusive and everyone feel that they're kind of welcomed and considered. Okay, so as I say, I went through those quite quickly. Hopefully you found something kind of useful to take away. I'm going to finish now by just looking at some key takeaways. So I think just to start off with, this slide for me is really important. The first key takeaway is a phrase that I know many of you probably are aware of. It was made famous by the disability advocate Meryl Evans, and that idea is progress over perfection. So it's a really useful phrase to remind us that we might not always get things right, or we might not be able to get our content as accessible or inclusive as we would like, but everything that we do really is making a difference. And that is particularly important, I think, to be aware of if you are doing this, if you're kind of engaged in quiet accessibilising and you're not doing it with the support of anyone else, because it can be quite a scary place to be if you don't have the support of your organisation or others. Even though you know that you're doing good, As I say, it can sometimes be a little bit overwhelming and feel a bit scary. So the second takeaway is that accessibility, whether quiet or loud, really, really does make a difference both to your learners and to the people who see the positive impact that it has on learning and challenging stereotypes. And this is why I use the image here of Mar Galtheran from Valencia's Regional Assembly. So she's thought to be the first person with Down syndrome to join a European Parliament. And I use this image on purpose. I use it specifically to challenge the diversish industry, which told me that I couldn't use images of people with certain types of disabilities because they would never be able to do a certain role or work in a certain organisation. Okay, so that brings me on to my last two slides. This slide is really just to let you know about an opportunity to access the taster module of the DALC programme. So we first released this to celebrate Global Accessibility Awareness Day in May last year. Since then, we have released the full programme, but if you'd like to get access to 7 free showcase lessons and find out more about how you can continue your quiet accessibilising journey, then please do feel free to email me or contact me on LinkedIn, and obviously very happy to let you have access to that. If you can just mention IDTX, mention the conference, that would be wonderful. And then just here finally are my contact details, so please get in touch or come and see me with any accessibility queries. We're also at Launchpad 24 at Learning Technologies in London in April. So one of the most things I'm most excited about that is that we have some Braille Lego. So I'm just going to show you that now. So if you want to come along and have a play with some Braille Lego, then as I say, come along to find us at Launchpad 24 at Learning Technologies. Okay, and that's me. So I'm very happy to answer any questions if anyone has any that you can point me towards, Tom.
There we are. I've managed the unmuting process this time.
Well done.
So I'm not sure. Once you get into your 30s, getting a well done for managing to unmute yourself is a bit depressing, isn't it? But I'll take it today. That's fine. So yeah, any questions? Now's the time. Drop them into the chat. I'm very excited for Learning Technologies now, though, because I want to see some Braille Lego. That's going to be awesome.
Brilliant, brilliant. Absolutely made my week.
So we've shared all the links, by the way, for everything that was mentioned there in the chat. They're also, though, in the video description below. So obviously when the chat disappears at the end of the live session, nothing's lost. Just while we're waiting, in case there are any questions, Olga flagged that apparently Maestro has a free guide of accessible Rise components. That's
brilliant.
Very cool.
Excellent. I haven't got that link there, but maybe, Olga, if you can post that one in.
We can certainly add it. Lots of thank yous, really helpful session. Oh, this is exciting news. Olga's coming over to LT for the first time this year.
Fantastic. Yay. She can come. You can come and play with some Braille Lego if you'd like. Then put that on your when you're working out your list of things to do.
Oh, so here's an interesting question.
Okay.
What's the additional time it takes to convert training to be more accessible?
Okay, so I think it's a very common question and obviously very understandable. I think it's one of those things that at the beginning, it's going to be really difficult for me to kind of put an actual time on this. But I think at the beginning, there's obviously a lot of investment of time, or more investment of time, as you become familiar with the types of things that you need to do. And then there's that lovely that analogy that we have in accessibility of the blueberry muffin. So the blueberry muffin is kind of like what accessibility baked in. So I know some people say, well, this analogy, it should have flour and whatever. But anyway, for me, it's always worked as a really good analogy. So the blueberry muffin is the idea that if accessibility is baked in at the beginning, then the accessibility is a bit like the blueberries in a baked blueberry muffin. It kind of like, is all gooey and delicious and how it should be. And if you do it afterwards as an afterthought, then it's much more cumbersome. It takes much more time. I always imagine just having a blueberry muffin and actually shoving the blueberries in. You can make it into a blueberry muffin, but imagine how long it would take you to be shoving in your blueberry. So if you, at the beginning of the process, especially if you're kind of looking at existing content if you're trying to kind of work out the way that you need to implement it, the kind of introducing it into your workflows, deciding who's what, training so that you know what you're doing, once that bit's been in place, it really just becomes every day, it just becomes part of the workflow. And yes, it does add a little bit of time, and again, it's really difficult to kind of quantify exactly how much, but things like, we were talking earlier, Tom, about AI being helpful to kind of sort of streamline some of the things that you're doing. I think as we're moving forward, it will, because one of the things that I found really helpful is working with tools that can give you alternative text. And again, never kind of let content go without checking that alternative text. But it's like a bit like the when we were looking at the plain language, it's a really good starting point that can save you a lot of time. So things like that, I think, will actually help to just to speed up the process as we move forward. At the beginning, there's no way around it. It does take more time to kind of learn what you need to do and to kind of introduce it into your work practice and in your workflow.
Awesome. We do have a few minutes, so as there's not another one come through, if you do have a question, pop it in the chat. But a question I always like to kind of throw out there with these things. There's a real push, I think, in L&D to be more efficient and work smarter, or whatever phrase we're attaching to it in 2024. We change it every year, but it always basically means we're going to give you less resource, but we want more output. It is always what it means. How do we make the argument, or how do we start making the argument that whatever resource, or within whatever resource we have, this needs to be a priority?
I think, from a, one of the things you do kind of in an advocacy role is very, I think it is impactful to kind of come back to the statistics. That one from the Boston Consulting Group I find really, really helpful, because the fact that, the perception that people have that there aren't people with disabilities in your organization, I think is so wrong, and so easy to kind of like to give examples of that. So I think that's always where I start from. The other thing I think is really proving that accessible learning content is better learning content, so that it's not something that we do. It's not a nice to have that we're doing it because it's just the right thing to do. It genuinely and kind of undeniably makes your learning content better. It puts the learner at the center of your learning, and it it deals for all of these, or like we talk about the temporary and the situational access needs. It talks, it's for me as well, we're sort of talking about what's the latest, not what's the latest trend, but things that are actually influencing us from outside. And that, for me, the kind of the neuro inclusion agenda, that becoming, it's hugely important, because what it's doing is challenging the kind of stereotypes that disability is us versus them. That idea of you can't have a disability if you can't be a learning professional if you have a disability. Well, how many learning professionals, they may not necessarily see it as a disability, but as an access need if you are neurodivergent, and your brain, again, coming back to Christina's talk yesterday, is thinking differently. So it's sort of picking up on the things that are most effective to who you're talking to in the, when you're doing that advocacy role. Is it, do you need to just prove how much extra money it's going to bring in if you are, we're still at a stage now where sort of specializing in accessibility is still a unique selling point. So it is still something that can be so brilliant for your kind of, for your business. So do you focus on that, or do you focus on it's a great piece of learning, or do you focus on the fact that you're doing, how it fits in with your diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda? How can you have that? How can you say that you're committed to that if your content isn't accessible and you're not considering people with access needs? So it's kind of like choosing choosing the advocacy for who you're talking to, really.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I always find it's a really interesting area, because I don't think we tend to meet many people in our roles that go, "Oh, I don't want to do it," but there's often this pressure around it. So I think the ability to advocate for that is huge. Awesome. Well, Susi, thank you so much. This was a really fantastic session. I know I've got a lot of stuff to go away and think about and take a look at. As mentioned before, all the links that Susi's mentioned are in the description. Please do go and check it out, including that taster session of the course. And of course, join us for our next session in 15 minutes with Helen Marshall, where we're talking about For the Love of Learning, why L&D needs to go back to basics. So thank you all, and we shall see you there. iSpring is an e-learning software provider dedicated to streamlining e-learning worldwide. With a team of top industry specialists, they create tools that make e-learning both efficient and enjoyable. Their AI-powered course creation tool, iSpring Suite, and the iSpring Learn LMS are the top choices for thousands of instructional designers, L&D pros, and content developers. Crafted with the user workflow in mind, iSpring ensures a seamless experience for the creation of